After decades of denying interest in the UFO phenomena, the U.S. government has begun to come clean.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
Beginning in December of 2017, rumors of a secret Pentagon UFO study was reported by the mainstream media. The result was an avalanche of UFO stories throughout the next couple of years, each one increasing the hope that disclosure of some sort of alien existence was about to become reality.
A secret UFO program has just been revealed. The military spent millions of dollars to look into UFO sightings, and those videos are now being made public.
Congress wanted answers, and now they may just get them from the intelligence community in mid-2021.
We are concerned about it. As the ranking member of Terrorism and Counterintelligence, we have questions. UAPs is what we call it. We want to know the information, and that's why it's important that we take a look at this.
But will it all be public knowledge, or just something for our elected leaders behind closed doors? And what, if anything, will be revealed? It may just be that the 1960s foreshadowed what we might expect. But is that a good thing? Stay tuned. You're about to journey inside the Black Vault. That's right, everybody. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and making this your podcast or your live stream of choice. I'm your host, John Greenwald Jr., founder and creator of theblackvault.com, and I'm making this video to address something that many of you have continually asked on social media and Twitter and so on that's very, very hard to sum up in a comment or a tweet, simply because there is so much that goes into the answer. And I love getting asked it because it has motivated me to make this video, and that is to address the upcoming UAP/UFO report that has been requested by Congress. Now, if you haven't heard about that, I'll get into a little bit of the history of it, but that is what this video is all about. Now, a quick note. This is what's called an evergreen issue in television. Now, I'm recording this in March of 2021. Obviously, there will be a day, hopefully, when that report will come. There's a scheduled date, and I'll get into why I don't believe that date is going to be met. But that aside, after that date, this video will seem outdated. But keep in mind, there's a lot of historical perspective that you might find interesting as well. So make sure that maybe you want to fast forward, check in the comments here on YouTube, below in the description. That'll kind of jump you to the different areas of which I talk about in this video. So let's go ahead and kind of jump into it. Most of you who are interested in UFOs probably know what I am talking about, and that is the fact that in about mid of June 1st, 2021 is kind of the going date. In mid of 2021, there will be this UFO/UAP report. That is supposed to be given to Congress, and essentially it's supposed to explain what this UFO phenomena is, what this UAP phenomena is. What do they know? What can they tell us as the general public? And so on and so forth. If you didn't hear about it, well, it was passed by that 5,593-page, $2.3 trillion bill that we all know as the COVID relief package that was signed by President Trump in December of 2020. What is not as well known if you don't follow the UFO phenomena is buried within that. It activated what's called the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021. Within that, there was a stipulation by Marco Rubio's committee that they were requesting a UFO report. Here's the actual text of it that I'm showing on the screen. I will just kind of go over the highlights. Essentially, what Rubio's committee was asking for was a report on unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, or as we better know them, UFOs. I don't know why they're trying to change the phrasing. They go hand in hand. If there's stigma attached, it's going to go along with UAPs. But I digress. So the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, which is centered at the Office of Naval Intelligence, they're going to be kind of coordinating this report for Rubio's committee and for Congress and the Senate to essentially tell them what we know and in turn inform the general public about what we know about UFOs. Now, clearly, this has created a ton of excitement around the UFO field, and outside the UFO field / UFO community, the general public is excited as well. They just hear kind of the surface layer. We're going to get a UFO report. Secrets will be revealed, and everybody gets excited. And I'm excited too. I can't wait to see what they actually will provide us. The question mark is, how far will they go? According to this request, and I'll read you a couple of the line items here, a detailed analysis of unidentified aerial phenomena data and intelligence reporting collected or held by the Office of Naval Intelligence, including data and intelligence reporting held by the UAP Task Force. That's what Rubio's committee is requesting this report contain. In addition, a detailed analysis of unidentified phenomena data collected by geospatial intelligence, signals intelligence, human intelligence, and measurement and signals intelligence. The third item that Rubio's committee was requesting in this report, a detailed analysis of data of the FBI, which was derived from investigations of intrusions of unidentified aerial phenomena data over restricted U.S. airspace, and it goes on from there. I encourage you all to read this section because it is fascinating on what Rubio's committee is requesting. I won't say it's unprecedented, as in it's never happened before. It has, and we'll get into that in a few moments. But it is, I would say, unprecedented for near the present day. Generally, we go back decades when we'd hear about UFOs and interest and stuff like that. Yet this is unfolding here in 2020/2021. That's awesome. That's amazing. There's a worldwide pandemic going on. People are dying. It's a very serious situation. And yet, in addition to dealing with all of that, UFOs is a hot issue, and they're requesting answers. They want things going on. So that, I think, in itself speaks volumes that this is a focus of any kind at the moment. That's what is very encouraging to me. Now, I want to take a moment to give a quick shout out to this man, Christopher Mellon. If you follow To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, that's Tom DeLonge's private group, you'll recognize his name from being involved in that. He has since left as of earlier this year. But also on the Unidentified series that was on History Channel. He was also making quite a few appearances on that as well. TTSA had published his language, his proposal for like a Senate bill. And what he published long before it became public that Rubio's committee was trying to get this, the language is very, very similar. And even though I have had my skepticism about certain groups like TTSA staking claims that they did X, Y, and Z and pretty much claim that they did everything, in this particular case, it's pretty obvious. And I believe that it all stems and roots to this man right here, who should be commended for however he did it. And I hope it comes out specifically with detail about how he got the interest of Rubio's committee, how he got in the door, and how all that unfolded. Likely that won't come out in as much detail as someone like me would want, but just I'm fascinated by how that would unfold and what you would tell someone like Senator Marco Rubio with, again, your political affiliations aside, whether you like him or not, it doesn't matter. For him essentially to kind of lead the charge in the political arena to say, hey, this is what we want, this is what we're requesting, and puts his name on it. That must have been a very interesting conversation. So kudos to Christopher Mellon for essentially spearheading that and getting that language into the right hands, which ultimately is now coming to fruition. So kudos to him. So now to your question, or at least the most commonly asked one, what can we expect from this report? And I'll be honest with you, I think the biggest thing that we can expect, and this is just an opinion, the very first thing I would say is a delay. I think that nothing happens on time, especially with government investigations and promises. And if they say that June 1st, 2021 is when the report is going to come, well, I'm a betting man. I would say, at least for $1 anyway, I would bet that no, that probably is not going to happen. I hope I am pleasantly surprised, but I think that is the first thing that we can expect. They will blame COVID. They will blame all sorts of different issues, but they will say that they cannot get the report in on time. Now let's jump ahead and just kind of assume for a moment it will come, or if it comes on the 1st or whenever, what's going to be inside of it. This is all a guess, and this is all something that is purely an opinion on my end, and I want to stress that about this part of it. I don't like to just go off of gut feelings and opinions on a lot of stuff, but this is just kind of for fun a little bit to speculate about what we might expect. I don't want to be a debunker / negative Nancy on this, but I think we have to put our expectations right on what will probably be in that report. And I think what we're going to hear about is a fluffed up version of what we have already heard about. Now, these 3 screen grabs here from the FLIR, the gimbal, and the Go Fast, they have leaked out already. Yes, it was a leak. In the eyes of the U.S. military, that was a leak. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations did an internal investigation. They also concluded that this was all unauthorized. It should not have been out. Now, although the Pentagon blames their own internal practices for what happened, that's all well and good. But regardless, it was a leak. It comes out. They later declassify the documents because I think that they were in a little bit of a conundrum. But that information has kind of circulated in many different forms since then. I believe the report is going to have a lot of that in it. It's going to seem new, but it won't be. It'll be a lot of the information that we've seen before that is leaked out, the videos and some of the details that they think is pertinent to inform the Senate and Congress about. But regardless, it's just going to be a lot of the fluffed up same stuff that we've heard about, because that's safe. The general public will eat it all up and they'll go, wow, this is great. You know, we've got this UFO report. Maybe they'll put some cool fancy pictures in there with like what you're looking at now if you're watching on YouTube. And that will make everybody really excited again. But in the eyes of the intelligence community, they've told us absolutely nothing new. It's all the same exact stuff. They'll jumble up the words a little bit. They'll maybe even add a few more like minor details, but the overall arch of the story will likely just be fluffed up versions of what we've already heard about. It'll also be some of the stuff that we haven't heard as much about, but we've heard about it if you care enough to look. Now, the War Zone is a group that I have a lot of respect for. You've heard me talk about them before. Joseph Trevithick and Tyler Rogaway, who's the main editor over there, along with some of their other great contributing writers, really do a great job. So if you're not familiar with the site, go check it out. But I bring up this article that they did, which they did an excellent job on, but they dug up some of the Navy pilot encounters with UAPs. Now, this isn't any smoking gun that it's alien. In fact, a lot of it reads like they were encountering unmanned drones or aerial systems or stuff like that. But regardless, those are the incidents that I think that this report is going to have in it, that they're going to start going into more fluffed up versions of these documents that the general public is going to not be as well aware of because, well, they don't have fancy pictures and videos, so the mainstream media doesn't pick them up as much, but you'll probably see a lot of this stuff as well. Kudos to the War Zone yet again. You'll also probably hear the D word a lot, drone. As the commercialization of drone usage has increased dramatically, so has the threat potential behind it, whether it be for domestic terrorism, international terrorism, or just all around good old-fashioned pranks and hoaxes and stuff like that. I believe that you are going to hear a lot about drones in this report. That is going to be a lot of their fallback, that they're going to say, look, we can't identify a lot of this stuff, But if you look at X, Y, and Z drones, and we have these types of incursions all the time, and we prosecuted this guy, they may even throw some cases in there about those that they were able to catch. Juxtapose that with Project Blue Book, you get that a lot. Some cases that were solved were used as essentially primers for those that were unsolvable because they didn't have, quote unquote, enough evidence. So you start to see kind of a narrative unfold here, in my opinion, that will definitely reflect that of decades ago. And drones are going to be a fallback, I believe. Evidence to that is in documents that I dug up through the Freedom of Information Act within the United States Air Force. What I was going for were internal communications about UAPs, UFOs. What were they talking about? You know, what can you deduce from that? Because a lot of times it's not give me all your UFO reports. I go after emails. I go after internal communications. For the FOIA requesters out there or those who want to get your feet wet, all of that is ripe for the picking when you utilize the FOIA in the right way and start asking for information and documents. So I went through the press office's emails with requests and asking for UAP keywords, UFO keywords, give me a search within this time frame, and got stacks of records where you can get these internal communications. In this particular one, Laura McAndrews, who is the United States Air Force spokesperson, she wrote this email, and she was talking about a story that broke in 2019, April to be exact, about essentially UAPs and what the Navy was talking about in regards to UAPs and how they were taking it seriously. I'm going to read this to you. This is her email. The Navy is updating and formalizing the process by which reports of unauthorized and or unidentified aircraft entering various military-controlled airspace. They mentioned the Air Force by saying, quote, for safety and security concerns, the Navy and the U.S. Air Force take these reports very seriously and investigate each and every report, which is true. What the Navy was trying to talk about was unmanned aerial systems. That got turned into UFOs and aliens. And that's the unquote. That's the end of Laura McAndrews' quote that I pulled. There's a little bit more to the email that you can see on your screen. I'll link it in the show notes as well. This gives you kind of the mindset of where they are internally. Now, I know a lot of people out there do not like spokespeople. They don't care for what they say. They think that they preach gospel when they like what they say. But when they say something that they don't like, it's generally, well, spokespeople are uninformed. That all very well may be true. But regardless, it does show from a PR perspective what the main spokespeople within the U.S. Air Force are talking about and where their mindset is at. So if they have any say in this, and if you pay attention to this channel, I posted a video that the Pentagon spokesperson, Susan Goff, who actually is kind of I would say a conduit for FOIA requests at this point, if that's the right word I'm looking for. Essentially, all FOIA requests that are UAP related are being channeled through her just to kind of have a last minute vet on it to make sure that nothing gets revealed or termed incorrectly that would make people like me create a video and, make everyone else excited. They want to make sure that they control the narrative. I believe that that is going against the spirit of the FOIA, but I did a whole video on that. I'll link that in the show notes as well. But make sure you just kind of see what I mean about the spokespeople getting involved. But if they do have a say in this, then even though they may not be the top brass, if they have a say, they could absolutely alter this UAP report to make it say, from a PR perspective, not transparency, not a willingness to declassify UFO secrets, but rather one of public relations. And that's the number one thing on their mind. That could absolutely scope this report to something that we don't want, which is just a fluffed up version of drone encounters, or those that are UFOs and UAPs. They're just simply termed as probable drones. And we see that a lot in government documents where they do probable XYZ. The NSA is notorious for doing probable balloons. That's another one. They put it as a parenthetical in some of their intelligence reports a probable balloon. So you see a lot of parallels between how agencies operate and how once they create a narrative, they will do everything they can to stick with it and to make sure that is the narrative that people continue to hear. Some of the language in the notes for Rubio's committee requesting this report, the last line is kind of the kicker. The report shall be submitted in unclassified form, but may include a classified annex. Essentially what that means is we're going to get a public report. Yippee. I mean, and I don't mean to downplay that. That truly is exciting. That is something that I'm looking forward to. But the fine print here, even though it's not technically fine, but the latter half of this sentence, but may include a classified annex. What information then will they deem classified for national security reasons that they will shove away into a classified annex that only our elected leaders can see? And that is going to be the wild card here that no one can answer, that we have no idea in the eyes of national security what they will claim. Now we're getting a taste of it because the Navy and the Pentagon have both said that anything related to UAP investigations, details, encounters, conclusions, if any, everything will remain classified. Those are improvable statements. That means that they've already created that PR message. They've already said anything related to this topic will remain classified. Now, to someone like me who doesn't give up, those are spokespeople. I have two words for them always when I hear something like that. Challenge accepted. That is my two-word phrasing that I will throw back, and then I'll utilize FOIA to see what we can get. And yes, I have been pleasantly surprised, and so have numerous other journalists who utilize the act, where spokespeople will draw the line in the sand, not only on UFOs, but all sorts of topics, and they'll go, nope, you ain't getting nothing else from our office. Through FOIA, all of a sudden, reams of information comes to light. So challenge accepted. When it comes to that, I will absolutely still be going forward with it, and I have appealed multiple decisions where they have denied UAP information under national security reasons and they consider it classified. I still have that open. So we'll see where we end up. I may get denied. I may get something. Not really sure, but I've got quite a few of them. The question mark, though, is when it comes to the Senate in this report, with that classified annex, they're not like me, meaning they have security clearances and they don't necessarily care about public transparency to the public. They don't care if the government is as open as it should be. They may tell you and me they are, and they care, and that they want us to be informed on everything that's going on with UAPs, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they believe. They are politicians at the end of the day, and on top of that, they truly, almost across the board, no matter what side of the aisle they think that they are on, generally believe that they know more than you and I, and they know better than you and I, and that classified annex will prove it, that they will just take that and not go, okay, guys, you got to release this. No, there's no reason to. They'll just utilize that classified annex, make whatever decisions they need to make about funding mechanisms or whatever bill that may come their way in the future or whatever it might be. That classified annex is a huge wild card. So that is something that when I read articles, may get a very quick mention, but it deserves more than a mention, because that could be the killer to this report having anything of real substance. Now, how do classified annexes work? I wanted to show you guys a real government document. This is from the Director of National Intelligence, the Inspector General side of that agency. This is the Inspector General of the intelligence community that operates under DNI. They did a semi-annual report. It's an unclassified document, so submitted to the public in the very same way. This was published 2016, so just a couple of years ago. And I wanted to show you guys kind of what reports like this look like. They give you kind of the overall information. But look down here in this fine print area underneath the information they gave you under completed reviews. Additional details of this report are in the classified annex. So what I'm trying to show you guys here is an example of what I fear is going to happen. They give you that fluff, right? They give you that information that we've heard about before in this area here. But the real stuff, the new stuff, the stuff that we really want, it's going to be tucked away in that classified annex. And there's going to be a footnote that said, additional details of this report are in the classified annex. And that's not once or twice throughout a report. In fact, there's numerous times within these unclassified documents that you can find citations like this. Here's another one. Here's another report, details about it. These are not UAP related, just in case you might be squinting at your screen or cell phone. If you're watching the video going, what's it say? It's just an unclassified public report I'm using as an example, but it gives you the details, gives you a brief overview here, and the citation at the bottom. Additional details of this report are in the classified annex. Same deal. Here's another page from that report, different section. They give you some of the brief overview. There's your citation. Additional details in the classified annex. Keep going, keep reading. Boom, here it is again. This is all from the same report. So you can see how many times they use it and utilize it to give the general public an aura of transparency. But when you read the fine print, it's nothing but. So I've made reference to decades past on how we are potentially just going down the same route, that this history has unfolded before. To me, it's uncanny, the similarities between what happened in the mid to late 1960s to what is going on now. I wanted to show you guys a letter. This is from the Gerald Ford collection at his presidential library. This was a 1966 March 28th of 1966 letter that he wrote to the Science and Astronautics Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'll link it also in the show notes to read the whole thing, including a lot of other UFO documents from Ford's library. But this was prior to his presidency. Gerald Ford was seeking a hearing about UFOs. Project Blue Book was still underway. This was 1966, still a little over 4 years away from closing down. And they wanted to do this hearing on UFOs to figure out what there was to it. Now, from 47 to 1966, up until when this letter was written, they were investigating thousands and thousands of UFO sightings. Gerald Ford felt it was potentially a national security risk, and it was a huge concern to him, specifically, as you see here on screen, in his home state of Michigan, but also nationwide and even worldwide. He felt that there was no plausible explanation or reasonable explanation, and he wanted a hearing. He was ready to say, hey, we need to take this seriously. We're the elected officials. We need a hearing on UFOs, UAPs, and we need the information public and out there. And so that's what he started pushing for. Very much a gamble on his side in the 1960s because the Air Force was already doing this for quite some time, as I said. So there was really nothing to support that this needed to continue. There was public interest and fear that there was, something else going on. The Soviets were overhead or whatever it might be. But there was true concern. But as time went on towards the end, it wasn't as big as it was, let's say, through the 50s when things were buzzing the Capitol and the White House and sensitive installations in D.C. So Ford gets involved. And here is in April of the same year, so things started kind of progressing fairly quickly, that he got his hearing. Gerald Ford's office released this press release. This is one of the originals. I got this from the Gerald Ford Library. This actually I had found when I was working for a show called UFOs in the White House on History Channel. So I got to utilize my UFO hat a little bit with then my television hat and go after documents I normally couldn't do. I got to go to the JFK library, Reagan's library, quite a few of them. So it was a lot of fun. This was one of those originals, a copy of the original of his press statement. You'll see here, he started the press release talking about the stigma about the UFO phenomena and the ridicule that he endured for putting his name to it. This is what he said. As I had expected, some persons have ridiculed my call for a congressional investigation of unidentified flying objects. These people are a fraction of those who have given me their reaction to my proposal. The overwhelming majority of those expressing a view in letters to me believe a congressional investigation would be useful and is needed. So he talks about the stigma and the ridicule factor, but also the fact that there was a public interest. Public wanted answers. Here's what he said in the second paragraph. Those who scoff at the idea of a congressional investigation of UFOs apparently are unaware that the House Armed Services Committee has scheduled a closed-door hearing on the matter Tuesday with the Air Force, and that Representative Joseph Karth, Democrat from Minnesota, headed a 3-man subcommittee which held 2 days of hush-hush hearings 5 years ago on behalf of the House Science and Astronautics Committee. So he was getting the hearings. Ford was successful writing that committee. Hearings happen behind closed doors, classified settings. Very, very similar to what's kind of going on now. April 5th of 66, that's when the House Armed Services Committee met. They did their hearing. They brought in Dr. J. Allen Hynek. They brought in Hector Quintanilla, who was from the United States Air Force, who headed Project Blue Book. There are huge transcripts of that available on the Black Vault. I'll link that in the show notes below as well. But there's a lot of information there. And so they brought in all of these experts, military, scientists, so on and so forth, for this particular hearing. According to the documents, and as we know from our history books, they were able to convince the Congress that this needed some kind of attention, more than the Air Force. Here's one document. The reports Project Blue Book should be given wide unsolicited circulation among prominent members of the Congress and other public persons as a further aid to public understanding of the scientific approach being taken by the Air Force in attacking the UFO problem. They wanted everything to go public, right? So they pushed Project Blue Book out to the people, but they realized that there should be more of an investigation. So the Secretary of Defense, this is OASD, Office of Assistant Secretary of Defense. They were headquartered at the Pentagon, still are today. They released this press release, and they state the following. Air Force selects University of Colorado to investigate unidentified flying object reports. So there was enough in those hearings to say, let's make it all public, but also let's get some scientific oversight here. Let's get someone, a third-party entity, someone with no skin in the game, not the Air Force, not even Congress. They chose a university to do a study. The press release said the University of Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, has been selected by the Air Force to conduct independent investigations into unidentified flying object reports. A research agreement valued at approximately $300,000 is being negotiated with the university by the Air Force Office of Scientific Research to analyze phenomena associated with UFO sightings and to make recommendations on the Air Force's method of investigation and evaluating UFO reports, a program known as Project Blue Book. A report is expected to be made to the Air Force in early 1968. A report requested. See? So very, very similar to what is going on now. What was that report? History shows us it was the Condon Report, headed by that man, Dr. Edward Condon. That report went into great detail about UFOs, what they had determined out of the thousands of studies, the fact that it was not a threat to national security, which is what they focused on, very similar to today's concerns with Marco Rubio and how he has talked about, hey, these things could potentially pose a threat. The Condon Committee report said, nope, no threat, no reason to continue, and Project Blue Book should be closed. So the intent that Ford had for a much closer eye of scrutiny here, where the UFO phenomena deserved not only public attention, but scientific scrutiny, congressional interest, so on and so forth, may have backfired here. Because now this report comes out and they say, no, we're not interested at all in this, not a national security threat. Just go ahead and close the whole thing down, which is exactly what they did. This is a copy of one of the original press releases, also by OASD. And they, in December of 1969, said, we're going to close Project Blue Book. Secretary of the Air Force, Robert Siemens Jr., announced today the termination of Project Blue Book. the Air Force program for the investigation of unidentified flying objects. That was the opening paragraph to the press release. And in January of 1970, Project Blue Book and the UFO investigation was done. For decades thereafter, even to this day, I got this screenshot in March of 2021. The United States Air Force maintains, and I'll quote, "The decision to discontinue UFO investigations was based on an evaluation of a report prepared by the University of Colorado entitled Scientific Study of Unidentified Flying Objects, a review of the University of Colorado's report by the National Academy of Sciences, previous UFO studies and Air Force experience, investigating UFO reports during 1940 to 1969. For decades, they utilized that Condon Committee report made by the University of Colorado to say, you know what? No threat to national security. We're not interested at all. So close investigation. And if the general public has anything to report about UFOs, go to local law enforcement or a private UFO group. Now, through the Freedom of Information Act over the years, prior to the realization of ATIP, even prior to ATIP even coming into reality before 2007, 2008, I was going after documents that disproved this. This was the focal point of my research prior to ATIP because they were in such denial that they had an interest in UFOs, and documentation proved otherwise. But regardless, to the public realm, that Condon report was cited numerous and countless times over the decades to say, we did our due diligence. There's nothing to this. Leave us alone. We don't care about UFOs. Even today, as I said, March of 2021, they still tout that fact sheet about UFOs. They cite that Condon report, and they say there is absolutely nothing to this. Now, when you juxtapose that to the 1960s, there are crazy parallels to what's going on. When you look at Project Blue Book and how it dissected even military encounters, that is exactly what is coming out today. This is a document obtained by the Drive and the War Zone. And you start comparing and how the incidents unfolded and how they documented them and how the reports looked, very much are they similar. You then also can juxtapose how the general public has been made aware of some of this stuff going on with the military experts that had these encounters. The top of the top guns, the ones that know their aircraft front, back, and sideways, the best of the best on the planet, are the ones that we are seeing in front of us on the cover of the New York Times, on documentaries, TV shows, news programs. This is what Gerald Ford said in the 1960s. I've just today received a number of telegrams urging a congressional investigation of UFOs. One is from retired Air Force Colonel Harold Brown, Ardmore, Tennessee, who says, I have seen a UFO, will be available to testify. Ford had grouped up the military experts to parade in front of Congress for that hearing. They were also public. There were various newsreels and stuff that you can find with some of the military encounters, those that were pilots and so on and so forth, very similar to how they are today. That press release that Gerald Ford sent out, as I had expected, some persons have ridiculed by call for Congress investigation of unidentified flying objects. He talked about the stigma and the ridicule factor and so on and so forth, that was a problem. That was what was prohibiting people moving forward and trying to get the reality behind UFOs. Juxtapose that with Luis Elizondo, who has come out and said almost identically the same thing. Very, very similar mindset to where Gerald Ford was at the time. That stigma stopped pilots and witnesses from coming forward. As a result, the ridicule factor was high, that if you did come forward, you were ridiculed and so on and so forth. So in the 1960s, Ford was essentially headlining his press statements with concerns about the ridicule. and the problems that were surrounding the UFO topic. One that was very serious, but we needed to get away from that ridicule factor. We needed to get away from that stigma, because Ford knew, as Luis Elizondo knows, as I know, and how probably most of you know, this problem, whatever it is, whatever the origin is, has to be addressed and taken seriously. But the public, in this regard, is potentially its own worst enemy. The report can be compared absolutely side by side to what is being requested today. The Condon report was a result of Congress saying we need a report. So the military, in the 1960s case, the U.S. Air Force said, okay, let's go to a third party. They had contracted the University of Colorado. Dr. Edward Condon chaired it. They created a report. And essentially the drive that Ford had to move this forward, to get answers, essentially backfired, because that report led the way for the cancellation of UFO interest and ultimately the stoppage of any interest whatsoever. But then on top of that, the report was referenced and has been referenced for decades and decades since the close of Project Blue Book as kind of the go-to piece of evidence on why the military and the government doesn't take this seriously. I fear that's what we're going towards here. When you look at the players involved, it's also fairly fascinating how you can match them up, because you had the former insiders in the 1960s, those like Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who came out and later created his own UFO research organization. He saw so much on the inside, he said, no, this needs a closer look. And yet the military says, no, we're not going to do it. Not a threat to national security. Go to your policeman. And so Hynek comes out, creates the Center for UFO Studies, and continues UFO work. Look at Luis Elizondo in today's story. Former insider, he says that they investigated UFOs, and he saw so much he couldn't get anybody to take it seriously. So he leaves the Pentagon and starts his own endeavor. Joins a private organization, not one he founded, but joins a private organization advocating for transparency and openness about UAPs. Although he as well has left that organization, I'm curious to know what he might be doing in the future and whether or not it will coincide with Dr. Hynek and keep pushing forward with a UFO research organization, or just enjoy his retirement. I don't, from the recording of this, at the time of this recording, I don't know what his future is. Other than it's still fresh. He is not too far off from leaving TTSA, and I don't know if that chapter is written for him yet. He doesn't confide in me in that way, nor do I push him for answers. I'm eager, as you all are, to see what happens. The era of the 1960s and that whole saga had your active politicians as well. Gerald Ford, as I showed you his original letters, compare that with Marco Rubio, taking the lead in charge, being one of the first ones to really kind of openly talk about how we need to figure out what this threat is and what's behind UAPs, and it's a concern of his, so he's demanding this report. Well, Ford demanded that report based on the same reasoning. You also have the former military and former government personnel, like Donald Kehoe and Christopher Mellon, those that were also on the inside, those also that were enlisted and so on, that essentially see what they see, some of which isn't known or essentially chronicled yet. I don't believe Christopher Mellon has talked openly about 100% of what he's always come across. At least that's the gist I get from him and seeing some of the interviews. He's obviously bound by clearance issues or NDAs, potentially when he was a government employee, Luis Elizondo as well. But they saw enough to know that there's something to this. You can draw that comparison there. And of course, the credible witnesses. You've got all the military pilots coming out like Fravor and so on and so forth. Juxtapose that with that Ford letter. I've just today received a number of telegrams urging a congressional investigation of UFOs. One is from retired Air Force Colonel Harold Brown. Bringing those military credible witnesses together in the same way. Nearly every aspect to what happened and what unfolded in the 1960s is unfolding now. Some of you may be watching this going, oh, come on, man, you're stretching trying to connect these individuals. Well, not really, because when you look at how everything has unfolded from the players involved and from the demand of a report, I fear that the report itself will also have a parallel connection, meaning the Condon report backfired when it came to demanding transparency and a serious investigation by the U.S. military and government. On the opposite end of what we wanted, rather it had closed the UFO investigation. Could that happen again? Could that report essentially come back to haunt the UFO community? And I don't know the answer to that. A lot of that is speculation. I just find the historical narrative that you could butt up against what is going on in present day from the players involved, the reports, and how it's all unfolded fascinating. Because what I've learned over 24, 25 years now of investigating government secrets is history often repeats itself. For those fans of this channel, you've likely heard me say that quite a bit. History repeats itself. And so that's why I find documents that are decades old, where some people go, that's, it's really snoozy, and people start snoring because, well, this happened in 1960. So who really cares what happened 50, 60 years ago? Well, the reason why you should care is history does often repeat itself. And when you look back in time like that, to a time when the Freedom of Information Act didn't exist, when there was a little bit more openness, when these military officers, personnel, government personnel, so on, when they were writing this, never really thought that their information would ever become public. So it is an excellent window that could show you what's going on today. It is truly looking back into the past to potentially figure out the future. And there are quite a few examples of that on all sorts of topics where, again, you see that history repeat itself. So what's the Director of National Intelligence going to do at this point? I believe they are going to make that report whenever it may come out. If it's on time, phenomenal. It's likely going to be late. If it is late, though, and it does come, what will be in it? And that is anybody's guess. So this video was a bit of speculation. As you know from this channel, I don't like to do that much. But I think it is fun to talk about and to, again, see that historical narrative, because that may determine what we might expect in the future. No matter what, it's going to be one heck of a ride. And I'm really glad I'm around to see it. And I'm glad you all have taken the time to watch this video. So thank you all for doing so. And you know the drill. The biggest thanks to me is simply spreading the word. So if you feel this video is worthwhile to your friends, your family, or just your social media reach, feel free to post it around. A thumbs up is always welcome, and make sure you are subscribed to this channel and turn those notifications on, because there's a lot of exciting stuff coming your way. Thanks again for listening. This is John Greenwald Jr. signing off. We'll see you next time.